Hi and welcome to my channel. When Scarlett and I decided to open our clinic, it felt like the culmination of everything we'd worked toward as a couple. We were both in our early 30s back then, bright-eyed and ambitious, with dreams as big as our bustling suburban city of Arlington, Texas. Scarlett, an orthodontist with a knack for patient care, became the friendly face of the practice, while I, a 45-year-old general dentist, focused on the technical side. The clinic wasn't just a business. It was our shared passion and, in many ways, the backbone of our marriage. Fast forward a dozen years, and life feels a bit more complicated. The clinic's name, Bright Horizons Dental, is plastered on a modest building at the corner of a busy strip mall. The practice, though steady, has seen its ups and downs. We've managed to hold our ground in the competitive landscape, but it's been exhausting. Scarlett and I juggle long hours, two teenagers, Lila, 15, and Ethan, 13, and the constant hum of family life. The mornings start like clockwork, a quick breakfast, a chaotic shuffle to get the kids off to school, and then we head to the clinic. Scarlett, now 42, with her auburn hair always tied back in a neat bun, handles patients with ease, her warm demeanor earning glowing reviews. Meanwhile, I'm in my element behind the scenes, fixing molars and fitting crowns. The staff, though smaller than we'd like, works like a well-oiled machine, mostly thanks to Scarlett's management skills. The clinic closes at 6 p.m., but paperwork and admin tasks keep us there till 8 on most nights. By the time we get home, the kids are engrossed in their own worlds. Lila is glued to her phone, texting friends or scrolling through TikTok, while Ethan disappears into his gaming console. Scarlett and I barely exchange more than a few words before retreating to bed, too drained to have meaningful conversations. The spark that once defined our marriage has dimmed, replaced by the routine grind of parenthood and business. Scarlett's smiles, though radiant as ever, feel less frequent when they're directed my way. Sometimes I wonder if she feels the same sense of monotony I do, the same silent question hanging in the air. Is this it? Still, life goes on. We've built a good life together, and our family is happy, or so I thought. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the first crack in my world appeared. Scarlett and I were in the clinic's break room, going over supply orders. The hum of the sterilizers and the faint buzz of the drill from the operatories filled the air, blending into the background like white noise. Scarlett was meticulously flipping through an inventory checklist, her manicured fingers skimming each line. "We're running low on composite resin," she said, her voice crisp. "And the new hygienist has been complaining about the ultrasonic scaler." I nodded absently, my attention drifting toward the window. The clinic's parking lot stretched out below, dotted with patients coming and going. That's when I noticed something odd. Our dental assistant, Maria, standing unusually close to Scarlett's car. Maria, a 28-year-old with a bubbly personality, had been with us for 3 years. She was reliable and efficient, though sometimes prone to oversharing. But what caught my eye wasn't Maria herself. It was the man leaning against Scarlett's car, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to her. He was tall, wearing a navy blazer over jeans, and he looked familiar. Too familiar. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the window. Scarlett glanced up briefly, her eyes narrowing as she followed my gaze. "Oh, that's Mark. He's with a medical supply company. Probably here about the new sterilization unit we ordered." The explanation made sense, but there was something about the way she said it, a little too casual, almost rehearsed. And Maria's body language seemed off. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her as if she were trying to shield herself. I brushed it off for the moment. Work was busy, and we had a full schedule of patients. By the time the day ended, I'd nearly forgotten about the man in the blazer, until I saw him again. That evening, as Scarlett and I were closing up the clinic, Mark reappeared. He strolled in through the front door like he owned the place, his confident stride contrasting sharply with the apologetic tone in his voice. "Sorry for the late visit," he said, flashing a disarming smile. "I just wanted to double-check the delivery schedule for your sterilizer." Scarlett's face lit up. More than it should have, I realized. "Of course, Mark. Let me grab the paperwork." I stayed silent, watching the interaction with a growing sense of unease. Mark had the kind of charm that made people gravitate toward him, but there was something almost too polished about it. Scarlett handed him the file, their fingers brushing briefly, and I felt an irrational surge of irritation. "Everything seems in order," Scarlett said, her tone a little too cheerful. "Thanks for stopping by." "No problem," Mark replied, his eyes lingering on her for a beat too long. Then he turned to me, his smile never faltering. "You've got a great team here, Dr. H." "Thanks," I said curtly, already disliking the way he said it, like he was part of the team himself. After he left, I turned to Scarlett. "He seems friendly." Scarlett laughed lightly, brushing past me to lock the front door. "Oh, come on. He's just doing his job. Don't tell me you're getting territorial over a salesman." The way she dismissed it rubbed me the wrong way, but I let it go. After all, there was no reason to suspect anything, at least not yet. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the image of Mark and Scarlett. I told myself I was overreacting, that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But the next morning, when Scarlett left for the clinic an hour earlier than usual, I found myself wondering if there was more to the story. Scarlett's early departure the next morning didn't sit right with me. She wasn't the type to make unplanned schedule changes. When I asked why, her answer was too casual. "We've got a supplier meeting," she said over her shoulder, grabbing her coffee and heading out the door before I could ask any follow-up questions. The kids were still upstairs, and the house was unusually quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Scarlett's half-empty mug. Something wasn't adding up. It wasn't the first time she'd left early recently, but now it felt suspicious. After getting the kids off to school, I headed to the clinic, trying to focus on the day ahead. Patients were waiting, staff needed direction, and the last thing I wanted was to let my paranoia affect the practice. But when I arrived, Scarlett wasn't there. "Where's Dr. Scarlett?" I asked Maria, who was sorting patient files at the front desk. Maria looked up, surprised. "Oh." She stepped out for a bit, said she had an off-site meeting. I frowned. Scarlett didn't mention an off-site meeting earlier. Did she say where? "No, but she left about 20 minutes ago." Maria shrugged, then lowered her voice. "I think she was with that supply guy again. Mark, right?" Her words hit me like a jolt of electricity. "Mark!" I tried to keep my tone neutral. Maria nodded. "Yeah, he stopped by earlier." They left together. "I think it's about the new sterilizer." It might have been innocent, maybe even professional, but something gnawed at me, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. "Thanks, Maria," I said, heading to my office and closing the door. I sat at my desk, trying to decide what to do. Every rational part of me screamed to let it go, to trust Scarlett, but the unease refused to leave. I pulled up the clinic's appointment calendar, scanning for any mention of a meeting. Nothing. My irritation grew. If it were strictly business, why the secrecy? I told myself I was overreacting, but that logic crumbled when I stepped into the parking lot during lunch. There, parked in the far corner, was Mark's navy blue Audi. Instead of returning to my office, I decided to take a drive. A half-baked plan formed in my mind. I'd look for them, confirm everything was above board, and put my doubts to rest. Scarlett was my wife. She deserved my trust. But trust is fragile, and by the time I found her car parked outside Cafe Roma, a trendy spot downtown, mine was already breaking. I parked a few spaces away, my heart pounding as I scanned the windows. Through the glass, I spotted Scarlett sitting at a table near the back. Across from her was Mark. I told myself they were discussing business, maybe even negotiating a better deal for the clinic. But their body language said otherwise. Scarlett was leaning forward, laughing at something Mark had said, her hand resting on the table just inches from his. Mark, for his part, looked entirely too comfortable, his gaze fixed on her like they were the only two people in the room. I sat frozen in my car, my mind racing. Was this really happening? Could there be an innocent explanation? I felt like I was watching my life unravel through the windshield. After a few minutes, they got up to leave. Scarlett smiled as Mark held the door open for her, his hand grazing her lower back. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to confront them, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. I wasn't ready for what I might hear. When I returned to the clinic, Scarlett was already back, chatting with Maria at the front desk. She looked up as I walked in, her expression completely normal, like she hadn't just had a cozy lunch with another man. "How was your morning?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Busy," she said with a faint smile. "You know how it is?" I nodded, pretending to be satisfied with her answer. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. I needed more than my suspicions. I needed proof. The next few days were agonizing. I watched Scarlett closely, scrutinizing every move, every word. She seemed normal, too normal, like someone who had rehearsed their lines. If she was hiding something, she was good at it. But I wasn't about to confront her without undeniable evidence. I needed more than a vague gut feeling or the memory of a lingering touch. Late Thursday night, after Scarlett had gone to bed, I sat in the dim light of the living room with a glass of scotch in hand. My mind raced with possibilities. If she was cheating, why? Was it boredom? The grind of running a clinic together? Or was it something deeper, something I'd done or failed to do? I thought about Mark, his too slick demeanor, and the way he looked at her like she was a prize to be won. The idea of someone else coveting what I thought was mine made my blood boil. But anger wasn't going to solve this. I needed a plan. That's when the idea hit me. The clinic security cameras. The building had a decent system installed, a necessity after an attempted break-in years ago. The cameras covered the parking lot, the waiting room, and the hallway leading to the operatories. Scarlett handled the system, but I had access too. Maybe the footage could show me something. I poured another scotch, booted up my laptop, and logged into the camera feed. Each video file was time-stamped and organized by date. I scanned through recent days, looking for anything unusual. It was a tedious process, and more than once I questioned what I was doing. Then, on Tuesday, I saw it. Mark entering the clinic at 8:45 a.m., early, even for a Supplier visit. He lingered near Scarlett's office, looking relaxed, his hands tucked casually in his pockets. A few minutes later, Scarlett appeared, smiling in a way that wasn't quite professional. They talked for a bit before disappearing down the hall toward her office. The door shut behind them, and they didn't reappear for almost an hour. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My hand trembled as I rewound the footage, trying to spot something definitive, but the hallway camera didn't show inside the office. Still an hour? For what? It didn't take that long to discuss supply orders. The next day, I watched the live feed like a hawk. Scarlett arrived at the clinic around 7:30 a.m., her usual time. Patients trickled in, the staff buzzed around, and everything seemed normal. But at exactly 10:15 a.m., Mark's Audi pulled into the lot again. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. He strolled in like he owned the place, carrying his ever-present clipboard. Scarlett greeted him near the front desk, and they exchanged a few words before heading back to her office. My blood boiled as I watched the door close behind them. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, and end whatever was happening right then and there. But I stayed frozen, my mind torn between action and caution. I needed to know what they were doing behind that door. That's when I decided to go a step further. The office wasn't just equipped with cameras. We had a discrete audio system installed for training purposes, one that recorded conversations in certain areas, including the offices. Scarlett rarely used it, but it was still operational. I accessed the recordings from Tuesday and fast-forwarded to the time they were in her office. I hit play, bracing myself for the worst. At first, it was benign. Paperwork rustling, the hum of the air conditioner, and vague talk about equipment. But then the tone shifted. "Thanks for making time for me," Mark said, his voice low. "Of course," Scarlett replied, her tone warm, almost intimate. The conversation grew more personal, about their lives, their struggles, their ambitions. And then a pause. "You deserve more than this," Mark said softly. "Mark," Scarlett's voice faltered. "You know how I feel about you," he continued. "I can't keep pretending this is just business." My heart stopped. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to listen any further. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real. I sat there, staring at the dark screen, the weight of what I'd heard pressing down on me. Scarlett wasn't just hiding something. She was living a separate life, a life I wasn't part of. But this wasn't the end. If she was going to betray me, I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. I needed a plan, and this time, it wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about deciding how far I was willing to go. The morning after I heard the recording, I sat in my car outside the clinic, staring at the front door. Inside was Scarlett, my wife of over 20 years, and somewhere in her office were the echoes of Mark's words. "You deserve more than this." It felt like betrayal had turned the entire clinic, the place we built together, into a crime scene. I wasn't just furious. I was humiliated. I couldn't stop replaying their voices in my head, trying to decode Scarlett's response, to figure out how deep her involvement was. Had they crossed the line physically, or was this still just emotional? Did it even matter? The answer came quickly. Of course it mattered. This was my life, my family, and my clinic. If Scarlett thought she could have some fantasy with Mark while keeping me in the dark, she was dead wrong. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be smart about this, to figure out how to protect myself and the kids. And maybe, just maybe, to expose Mark for the snake he was. I made it through the morning on autopilot, doing what I always did, filling cavities, fitting crowns, and pasting on a polite smile for patients. But my mind was miles away. Scarlett seemed perfectly at ease, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. It was infuriating, and it only strengthened my resolve. By lunchtime, I'd made my decision. I was going to confront Mark, not Scarlett. She denied me the truth for weeks, maybe months, and I wasn't going to play her game. If anyone could confirm how far this had gone, it was him. That afternoon, I left the clinic early under the pretense of a supplier meeting. Instead, I drove to the cafe where I'd seen them together. It was a gamble, but one that paid off. There, sitting by the window with his ever-present clipboard, was Mark. He didn't notice me as I approached. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to slam his face into the table, and slid into the chair across from him. His startled expression was almost satisfying. "Dr. H," he said, clearly caught off guard, "didn't expect to see you here." "That makes two of us," I replied, my voice cold. "We need to talk." Mark glanced around nervously. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said flatly. "I think you know why." His face paled slightly, and he leaned back in his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the crap, Mark. I've seen the footage, and I've heard the recordings. So either you come clean now, or I make sure your boss knows exactly how you've been spending your time on company hours." He hesitated, his composure slipping. "Look, Dr. H, I don't want any trouble. Too late for that." My voice was low, but the menace in it was unmistakable. "How long has this been going on?" "It's not what you think," he stammered. "We haven't. Nothing's happened." "Not really. Not really," I repeated, my hands clenching into fists under the table. "You think I care about technicalities? You've been sniffing around my wife and my clinic on my dime, and you have the nerve to act like it's no big deal." Mark squirmed, his bravado crumbling. "I swear, I didn't mean for this to happen. Scarlett, she's amazing. We've talked a lot, and yeah, I care about her. But she loves you. She's frustrated, okay? She feels like you don't see her anymore." His words stung more than I expected. Was that true? Had I been so focused on the clinic and the kids that I'd neglected Scarlett? But then anger took over. This wasn't my fault. Whatever issues we had, sneaking around with Mark wasn't the answer. "I don't care what Scarlett told you," I said through gritted teeth. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end whatever this is immediately. No more meetings, no more phone calls, no more lunches. If I so much as see you near her again, I'll ruin you. Understand?" Mark nodded quickly, his hands raised in surrender. "Got it. I'm sorry. Okay. It's over." I stared him down for another moment, then stood. "Good. And one more thing. If you ever try to make me the villain in my own marriage again, you'll regret it." Without waiting for a response, I walked out, leaving him to stew in his guilt. But as I got into my car, I realized this was just the beginning. Confronting Mark was one thing. Facing Scarlett would be an entirely different battle. Confronting Mark had felt like a small victory, but it did little to quell the storm brewing inside me. The entire drive home, my mind waged war with itself. Anger, betrayal, and a sliver of doubt gnawed at me. Mark's excuse, "She feels like you don't see her anymore," played on repeat. Was that a genuine glimpse into Scarlett's mind, or just his justification for his own selfishness? That evening, I decided I couldn't delay the inevitable. If I was going to confront Scarlett, I needed to do it with a clear head and a plan. But first, I needed to gather my thoughts, to make sure I wouldn't let my emotions derail the conversation. I poured a stiff drink and settled in my office, surrounded by the hum of the clinic's after-hour silence. My laptop sat open on the desk, the security footage and audio files queued up. I hit play, forcing myself to relive every moment of their exchanges. Scarlett's tone, warm and familiar, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Mark's words dripped with opportunism, but hers carried something deeper. Confusion? Longing? Guilt? After an hour, I had all the confirmation I needed. They hadn't crossed the line into a physical affair yet, but emotionally, Scarlett had already betrayed me. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call a lawyer. Dividing the clinic, our assets, and custody of the kids would be a nightmare. The thought of uprooting Lila and Ethan's lives made my stomach churn. I couldn't let this spiral out of control. Not until I gave Scarlett a chance to explain herself. Scarlett was in the kitchen when I got home, chopping vegetables with a precision that rivaled her skills at work. She looked up as I entered, her smile as bright as ever. "You're home late," she said. "Everything okay?" I studied her, searching for cracks in the facade. She seemed so composed, so at ease. It was infuriating. How could she act so normal after what I'd uncovered? "Yeah," I replied, forcing my tone to remain calm. "Long day. Patients were a handful." "Tell me about it," she said, setting the knife down. "I had a walk-in with a cracked crown. Took forever to fix." "Sounds like you had company," I said, my words pointed but casual. "Mark stopped by again, didn't he?" Her hands froze, just for a fraction of a second. If I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have missed it. "He did," she said, her tone even. "He's been handling the sterilizer upgrade." "Why?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Because it seems like he's been spending a lot of time here lately. More than a supplier usually does." Scarlett's eyes flicked to mine, searching for something, an accusation, maybe, or a trap. "He's thorough," she said with a shrug. "It's nothing to worry about." "Isn't it?" I asked, my voice tightening despite my effort to stay calm. "Because I've been watching, Scarlett. I've seen the footage. I've heard the conversations. So why don't you tell me what's really going on?" Her face drained of color. "You've been spying on me," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and something else, fear maybe. "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You're the one sneaking around with him, Scarlett. Laughing with him. Leaning into him. Telling him things you haven't told me in years." She stepped back, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're throwing away everything we've built. Our clinic, our family, for some guy who barely knows you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "It's not like that," she said softly. I've been feeling lost, invisible. And Mark, he noticed me. He listened. And I don't." I shot back. "Do you know how insulting that is? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your wife smile at another man the way you used to smile at me?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely. And he was just there. Lonely," I repeated, my tone bitter. "So that justifies betraying me? Lying to me? Letting some stranger walk into our lives and tear them apart?" "No," she cried. "I know it doesn't. I've made mistakes, but I haven't done what you think. I never slept with him. I never." "Yet," I interrupted coldly. "You haven't done it yet." Her sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I stood there, my chest heaving with anger and hurt as the weight of her words settled over us both. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about us, about what had gone wrong, and whether it could ever be fixed. Scarlett's sobs eventually quieted, leaving an oppressive silence between us. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, avoiding my gaze as she spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "But you need to know that I never wanted this. I didn't even realize how far it had gone until now." Her words sounded rehearsed, and they did little to soften the anger roiling in my chest. "You didn't realize?" I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. "What part of this didn't you realize, Scarlett? The long lunches? The private meetings in your office? The fact that you've been shutting me out for months?" "I wasn't shutting you out," she protested, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her doubt. I don't know what I was doing. I've been struggling, okay? With the clinic, the kids, everything. It's like I've been drowning. And Mark, don't." I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't say his name again." She flinched, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Scarlett," I said, my voice cold. "You made a choice to let him into your life. Into our life. And now you want me to believe this was just some emotional slip-up? That it doesn't mean anything?" "It doesn't," she insisted, her eyes pleading. "It was a distraction. A stupid, selfish distraction. But it's over now. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the betrayal still burned too brightly. And her apology felt like too little, too late." "You say it's over," I said, my voice low. But how do I trust you after this? How do I know there isn't another Mark waiting in the wings the next time you feel distracted? Scarlett opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She stared at me, her expression crumbling under the weight of my accusation. And for the first time, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to. I need to. For us, for the kids, please, Alan, don't give up on me. Her plea hung in the air, raw and desperate. Part of me wanted to grab her, to shake her, to demand to know why I hadn't been enough. But another part of me, quieter but just as insistent, wanted to find a way forward. I exhaled slowly, the fight draining out of me. If you want to fix this, I said, my voice tight with emotion, then you need to start by proving that you're done with him. No more meetings, no more phone calls, no more anything. I want him out of our lives, Scarlett. Completely. She nodded quickly, her tears spilling over again. I promise, she said, her voice breaking. I'll do whatever it takes. You'd better, I said, turning away from her. Because if you don't, there won't be another chance. I left the kitchen and headed upstairs, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me like a lead blanket. When I reached our bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Scarlett might have promised to cut ties with Mark, but promises were easy to make and even easier to break. If she wanted to rebuild what we had, she'd need to do more than just apologize. She'd need to prove that she was willing to fight for our marriage as hard as I had been fighting to hold it together. And even then, I wasn't sure it would be enough. The next morning, Scarlett was already gone by the time I woke up. It wasn't unusual. She often left early to prep the clinic, but after last night's conversation, it felt like an escape. The empty space in the bed beside me seemed more significant, as if it represented the growing chasm between us. I got ready quickly and drove to the clinic, half expecting to see Mark's Audi in the parking lot. Thankfully, it wasn't there. Inside, Scarlett was sitting at the front desk, typing furiously on her laptop. She glanced up when I walked in, her expression unreadable. "Morning," she said cautiously. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The tension between us was palpable. The staff must have noticed, but no one said anything. Maria greeted me with her usual cheerful smile, but even she seemed wary, her gaze flickering between Scarlett and me like she was piecing together a puzzle. The morning passed in a blur of patients and procedures, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting to Scarlett, what she was thinking, whether she'd already contacted Mark to end things, and whether she'd follow through on her promise. By lunchtime, my curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into my office and checked the clinic's security feed. Scarlett was still at the front desk, working on her laptop. Good. At least she wasn't sneaking off to meet him. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Scarlett was texting, her fingers moving quickly across her phone screen, her expression tense. I couldn't see the message, but the timing felt too convenient. Was she reaching out to Mark? Or was this something innocent? The uncertainty was maddening. After the last patient left for the day, I decided to confront Scarlett again. We couldn't keep tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. If we were going to move forward, we needed to clear the air completely. "Can we talk?" I asked as she gathered her things in the break room. She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." I gestured toward my office, and she followed me inside. I closed the door behind us, leaning against it as I crossed my arms. "Have you spoken to him?" Her eyes widened, and she looked genuinely offended. "No, I haven't. I told you last night. It's over." "I need more than your words, Scarlett," I said, my voice firm. "If we're going to rebuild this, I need to know you're being honest with me." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "What do you want me to do, Alan? Block his number? Delete him from my life? Fine, I'll do it." She pulled out her phone and, to my surprise, opened her messages right in front of me. "Look," she said, scrolling through her texts. No messages from him. No calls. Nothing. It was true. Her inbox was clean, but something about it felt too clean, like she'd already anticipated this and taken precautions. "Let me see your call log," I said. Scarlett hesitated, her fingers pausing over the screen. That hesitation was all I needed. "Forget it," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You can't even look me in the eye, Scarlett. How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" She slammed her phone down on my desk, her eyes blazing. "You're asking me to prove a negative, Alan. I already told you. There's nothing going on anymore. But if you keep pushing, you're going to drive me away for good." I stared at her, my chest heaving with frustration. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who betrayed our trust. All I'm asking for is proof that you're serious about fixing this. And I've given it to you," she shot back. "I've done everything you've asked. I ended things with Mark. I've been completely transparent. What more do you want? I want my wife back," I said, my voice breaking despite myself. "The woman who used to fight for us instead of running to someone else." Scarlett's anger melted into something softer. Guilt, maybe, or regret. She stepped closer, reaching for my hand. "I'm still here, Alan," she said quietly. "And I'm willing to fight for us if you are." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. But the wounds were still fresh, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. "We'll see," I said finally, pulling my hand away. "But you need to understand something, Scarlett. This is your last chance. If I catch even a hint of you backsliding, I'm done." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand." I opened the door, letting her leave first. As she walked out, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made the right choice. Could we really rebuild what we'd lost? Or was this just the beginning of the end? The following weeks passed in a haze of strained conversations and forced smiles. Scarlett and I coexisted like business partners at best, silent cohabitants at worst. On the surface, things seemed stable. We worked together, ate dinner with the kids, and even made an effort to watch a movie on Friday nights. But beneath it all, the fracture in our marriage felt like a canyon widening with each passing day. Trust didn't rebuild itself overnight. Every time Scarlett's phone buzzed, every time she stayed late at the clinic, my heart raced with suspicion. I hated what I was becoming, a man obsessed with uncovering a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to find. But one late evening, I found more than I bargained for. I was reviewing patient files in the clinic's office while Scarlett finished up with a last-minute appointment. It was almost 8 p.m., and the parking lot outside was dark and empty. I could hear the faint hum of her voice as she explained post-op care to the patient, a teenager who just had their braces tightened. When the patient left, Scarlett lingered in the operatories, cleaning and organizing trays. She was meticulous about everything, a trait I'd always admired. I was about to call out to her when something caught my eye. Her phone, left on the counter beside her laptop. It buzzed once, then again. My stomach churned as I saw the name on the screen, Mark. I froze. Scarlett had promised she'd cut him off, promised that their distraction was over. But here it was, undeniable proof that the ties hadn't been severed. My mind screamed at me to walk away, to let it go, but my hand moved on its own, snatching up the phone and unlocking the screen. The message was simple. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I scrolled up, my fingers trembling. The thread wasn't long, just a handful of messages over the past week, but each one hit like a sledgehammer. "Mark, can we meet? Just one last time. Scarlett, it's not a good idea. Alan's watching everything. Mark, I just need closure. Please. Scarlett, fine. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The cafe. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The cafe. My cafe. The same place I'd seen them before. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, rage bubbling to the surface. She had lied to my face, played the part of the repentant wife, all while keeping him in her orbit. Footsteps approached, and I'd barely had time to return the phone to its place before Scarlett entered the room. She smiled faintly, her face weary but calm. "Ready to head home?" she asked. I nodded, forcing my expression into neutrality. "Yeah, let's go." That night, I barely slept. Scarlett seemed oblivious, falling asleep almost instantly beside me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through scenarios. I could confront her now, force her to admit what I already knew. But what would that accomplish? She'd lie, deflect, twist her words into something resembling an apology. No, I needed more than a confrontation. I needed to catch her in the act, to leave no room for denial. The next day, I canceled my afternoon appointments and parked my car 2 blocks away from the cafe. I arrived early, staking out a table near the back where I'd have a clear view of the entrance. My heart pounded with anticipation, every passing minute dragging out like an eternity. At exactly 2 p.m., Scarlett walked in. She wasn't dressed unusually, jeans, a fitted sweater, and her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She scanned the room, her expression tense, and headed for a table near the window. A few minutes later, Mark arrived. I watched as they exchanged brief, awkward smiles. Mark sat across from her, leaning forward like a man desperate to be heard. Scarlett kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her posture rigid. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. The way Mark reached for her hand, the way she didn't immediately pull away, it was enough. I snapped a picture with my phone, my hand shaking as I captured the moment. It was over. Whatever excuses Scarlett might offer, whatever justification she'd try to spin, this was proof that she'd betrayed me again. I stood, ready to confront them then and there, but something stopped me. This wasn't the place. Not with strangers all around, not with the image of our family still intact. I needed to think, to plan my next move carefully. As I left the cafe, the finality of it hit me. Scarlett had chosen this path, not once, but twice. And now, there was no going back. I drove home in silence, the picture on my phone burning a hole in my consciousness. Scarlett and Mark in the cafe, her hand resting in his. It was all the confirmation I needed. Any lingering hope that we could salvage our marriage evaporated on the drive back. This wasn't about miscommunication or boredom anymore. It was betrayal, pure and simple. And now, it was my turn to decide what came next. I sat in the kitchen for hours, staring at the photo. The kids would be home soon, and I needed to figure out how to act normal. For their sake, at least. Lila and Ethan deserved better than to be caught in the crossfire of their parents' crumbling marriage. But normalcy felt impossible when every fiber of my being wanted to confront Scarlett and lay everything bare. When she finally walked through the door, her expression was unreadable. She set her purse down, offering a tired smile. "Hey," she said. "Busy day?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slid my phone across the counter toward her. She glanced down at the screen, her face paling as she saw the image. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "You followed me," she said quietly. "I did," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "And thank God I did, because it seems like honesty isn't your strong suit." Scarlett sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending this is anything less than what it is. You promised me, Scarlett. You swore it was over. And yet here we are." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I needed closure," she said. "I didn't want to leave things unresolved." "Closure?" I repeated, my tone incredulous. "You needed closure with a man who's been trying to destroy our marriage? How does that work, exactly? By holding his hand and giving him another chance to worm his way back in?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I told him it was over. For good this time. And I'm supposed to believe that?" I asked, leaning forward. "After all the lies? After all the times you've looked me in the eye and told me one thing while doing another?" "I'm sorry," she said, her tears flowing freely now. "I've made so many mistakes, Alan. I don't even know how to begin to fix this." I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and grief. "You can't fix this," I said finally. "Not anymore." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the silence between us was deafening. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying it's over, Scarlett," I replied. "I've done everything I can to save us, but you've made it clear that you don't want to be saved. You've chosen him, whether you realize it or not." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want him. I want us. Please, Alan, don't do this." But her plea fell on deaf ears. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could undo it. I stood, grabbing my keys. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight," I said. "We'll talk about the kids and the clinic tomorrow." Scarlett sobbed as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The life we'd built together was gone, and all that remained was the wreckage of what might have been. As I drove away, the weight of the decision settled over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, for me, for the kids, or even for Scarlett. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to spend another day fighting for someone who wasn't fighting for me. Divorcing Scarlett was like pulling teeth without anesthesia, painful, messy, and drawn out far longer than it needed to be. I thought we could keep things amicable, for the kids' sake if nothing else. But once lawyers got involved, all pretense of civility evaporated. Scarlett didn't want just half of what we'd built. She wanted to gut me. The clinic, the house, the savings, everything was on the table, and she fought for it like her life depended on it. In a way, it did. Her betrayal hadn't just cost her our marriage. Word got out in the local dental community, and the whispers about her relationship with Mark turned into a roaring wildfire. Referrals dried up. Patients started canceling appointments. The once thriving clinic we'd built together was now a liability. And Scarlett, in her desperation, blamed me for all of it. "You're poisoning people against me," she accused one day during a particularly brutal mediation session. Her lawyer, a smarmy guy who looked like he'd just crawled out from under a rock, nodded as if her outbursts were gospel truth. "I don't need to poison anyone," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself." The mediator tried to steer us back to the financials, but by then, I was done playing nice. Scarlett had underestimated me, thinking I'd roll over and let her take everything. But while she'd been busy trying to salvage her crumbling reputation, I'd been gathering ammunition. First, there was Mark. His employers didn't take kindly to the kind of extracurricular activities he'd been engaging in on company time. A few well-placed phone calls later, Mark was out of a job. It wasn't hard to tip off his wife, either. Yes, he was married, though he'd conveniently omitted that detail during his trysts with Scarlett. Let's just say his personal life imploded spectacularly. Then there was Scarlett herself. I'd been meticulous about documenting everything. Her affair, her lies, the financial mismanagement at the clinic. By the time we reached court, I had a mountain of evidence that painted her as reckless and untrustworthy. The judge didn't buy her sob story about being a neglected wife. Instead, he awarded me primary custody of Lila and Ethan, along with the clinic. Scarlett got the house and a modest settlement, far less than she'd been gunning for. But my revenge didn't stop there. I rebranded the clinic, renaming it Harrison Family Dental and making it clear that Scarlett was no longer part of the operation. Patients returned in droves once her name was off the signage. Maria, our dental assistant, stepped up as office manager, and within a year, the clinic was thriving again. Meanwhile, Scarlett struggled to find work. Her reputation in the dental community was in tatters, and the few practices willing to hire her offered little more than temp work. The last I heard, she'd moved out of state, leaving Mark behind to deal with the wreckage of his own life. The kids took the divorce hard, especially Lila. At 15, she was old enough to understand what had happened, but the betrayal cut deep. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, adapted more quickly. "At least now we don't have to listen to you two fight," he said once, with a shrug that belied his hurt. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, but some scars couldn't be hidden. Therapy helped, both for them and for me. Slowly, we rebuilt our lives, finding a new rhythm as a family of three. As for Scarlett, she reached out once about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. It was late, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with regret. "For everything." I let her words hang in the air, offering no reply. Do you think we could ever fix this?" she asked hesitantly. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We can't." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. For the first time in years, I felt free. Revenge might have felt sweet in the moment, but my real victory came in moving on. I poured my energy into the clinic, the kids, and eventually myself. I started running, picked up woodworking, and even took a solo trip to Alaska, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting. And love? It found its way back into my life, though not in the way I expected. A year after the divorce, I met Claire, a kind, no-nonsense physical therapist who made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. She knew about my past and didn't shy away from it. Instead, she helped me see that life after betrayal wasn't just possible, it could be beautiful. Scarlett had taken a lot from me, but she hadn't taken everything. And in the end, I came out stronger, not because of what I'd lost, but because of what I'd gained. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow. Goodbye.